Back in the 16th and 17th centuries, some men, who were undoubtedly uncles, came up with a hierarchy of painting for the art world. At the top, paintings with people in them, so usually scenes of historical, mythological, or biblical events. Then you have portraits, also of people. Then subjects that come from everyday life. Then landscapes, paintings of animals, and way down at the bottom, still life. But for some reason, it's stuck around for the entire history of visual art. I'm Professor Lees, not really a professor, and this is Art 101, not really a class. We're here to go on a deep dive of an idea, an artwork, or a story from the art world that's controversial, inexplicable, or just plain weird. And our question today is, what's the deal with still life painting? What is it? Why did it start? What were some of the motivations behind it? And how has it clung onto that low spot on the gallery wall instead of politely disappearing? Well, let's simplify it and say it's a painting of objects that are at rest. It was ubiquitous throughout European painting and featured tables laden with fruit, flowers, and maybe a skull. Here's one reason, because they like to win-win-win. There's a story from antiquity about how two painters, Zevskis and Parassios, had a contest to figure out who was the better painter. Zevskis painted a bunch of grapes that looked so real birds tried to eat them. Parassios had his painting hidden behind a sneaky curtain, and when Zevskis tried to move the curtain to reveal Parassios' work, it turned out the curtain wasn't real. I don't know whether this story is true, but it points to the drive among artists to fool our eye and the banality of normal objects as a vehicle to showcase their talent. Another reason artists painted still lifes? Religion. Religious art is a trickstery little art form full of symbols that were understandable to the initiated, like how arrows could let you know you were looking at a painting of Saint Sebastian. Everyday objects could play a similar role. So when you saw a small still life as part of a scene in a religious work, it could be commenting on the larger narrative playing out around it. For instance, a rose could symbolize the Virgin Mary, or a lily, virginity. In both Northern Europe and in Italy, where still life painting tended to be called nature morte, or dead stuff, there was also a scientific impulse. In the age of scientific inquiry, there was a drive to find out more about things in the world, classify them, order them, and find out more about their individual properties. This coincided nicely with the idea that art was aiming to perfectly replicate the world in 2 dimensions. But the symbolic nature of still life painting never quite went away. In Northern Europe, it wasn't uncommon to see a skull amongst the fruits and flowers, or see everything in a state of kind of gross decay. This was to signal an element of vanitas, or memento mori. By the way, there's a whole Art 101 about that. The idea that time passes, things rot, and you will one day not be here. Still life painting fell somewhat out of favor as we moved into the later 19th and early 20th century, as artists started breaking the rules of painting and revolting against rules made by surly men. But even then, the detritus of normal life, like wine bottles and newspapers, made a great tool for saying things about painting. Cézanne played with perspective in his still lifes to the point that it often looked like a table was about to topple. Matisse used still life to play with color, and Picasso, I still don't like you, Picasso, and his Cubist compatriots painted a lot of cafe tables, not only to play with ideas about 2-dimensionality, but to comment on cafe culture of the time and the conversations and music happening around them. Later in the 20th century, still life subjects got further transposed by artists of Dada and Surrealism. Marcel Duchamp used things like a urinal and a bike wheel to question what we consider to be art. And artists like Merritt Oppenheim took normal objects and made them uncanny. It's a fair distance from still life's origins, but it still means still life painting is more important than an afterthought to be hung at the bottom of the wall. Even in more contemporary art, the still life is still relevant. Think of Warhol's Campbell's soup cans, an examination of a common object that's also a critique of commodification. Artists today have resurrected the phantom of the still life in a critical way. Ursula Johnson stages her works like still life sculptures of tourist souvenirs to talk about stereotyping and commodification of indigenous culture. We may not be invoking religious symbolism or competing in weird art contests, but still life painting still held and holds real value for artists, even if your uncle doesn't think it's real art. See you next time on Art 101.